All right. Let's start from the front. We'll work ourselves around.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I've been wondering for a couple years now. Why haven't they shut the museum down?
So Israel, of course, doesn't like what we are doing, but what I did when I told you we decided to start a museum by donating to Bethlehem University, the reason I chose Bethlehem University and where the museum is located is Bethlehem University is the university that was started by the Vatican. And the land that I live on is actually church land. It's Catholic church land. So if Israel picks on the museum, they'll be picking a fight with the Pope. Hopefully. But it doesn't mean they don't harass us, okay? And they don't prevent us from doing things. It's very, very difficult to do things. I don't want you to misunderstand. For example, anything I import is subject to Israeli rules. I cannot have 100% alcohol for my molecular biology lab. I cannot have formaldehyde for preserving specimens. There are many, many things I'm not allowed to have. Doesn't mean I don't have them. Again, that's a form of civil disobedience. We smuggle them, okay? So we need stuff. Even books, by the way. There was one person here in the US who donated books to us, sent them, shipped them. They arrived at the dock in Tel Aviv. Israel held them and demanded that we pay $900. Bethlehem University pay $900 for these used books for whatever they call it, value-added taxes, whatever, import taxes, and dock fees, which were like $50 a day. And I said, take them back. They're not worth even $300, $400. So it happens like that. 7 volunteers who tried to come to work with us, even though we tell them, don't say you're coming to volunteer with us, say you're a tourist. Somehow they just put them on the next plane, sent them back. 7 volunteers out of some 110 that have come over the past 3 years. So it can be a problem for us. There are challenges. When we study nature, for example, there are areas they don't let us go to. There are areas we go to when they don't let us go to, and we end up paying a price for it. One time they came, we were collecting scorpions with a UV light in the middle of the night. You can imagine that's very suspicious activity. So I was looking at the ground, I wasn't paying attention. There were 2 young people with me also not paying attention. Suddenly there's these floodlights from every direction and guns pointed at us and shouting at us through bullhorns, stop, raise your hands in there, all in Hebrew of course, but anyways. So we do get harassment, but so far not totally closing down. Yes?
Okay, so I have a couple of things to say. First of all, it seems like the right of return march has sort of broken up that whole ideological framework that you were talking about in terms of the colonization, because people were putting themselves on the line month after month and getting killed for it, but nevertheless showing that they weren't going to stand up to Israeli colonialism. So I think a lot of that you mentioned is broken, but the one thing that you didn't mention, and I think the whole way that you put the question of diversity is quite lovely, and in reality it creates strength as opposed to weakness. But the one thing you didn't mention is capitalism. And I think that's the reason why, a couple of things. Herzl was not just somebody who had an idea about Zionism and couldn't stand the Gentiles in Europe. He was also fighting against the Jews who were leftists and socialists, and people saw Zionism as an antidote to it. And I think that without socialism in the Middle East, and there being a federation of socialism among the different countries, the Arab countries, even a one-state solution isn't going to be able to exist, because Netanyahu and the Israelis are not going to ever allow that to happen. I think you're right about the two-state solution, but without overthrowing capitalism in general, I think that that whole notion of diversity and people living together in harmony is not going to ever happen, because the Israeli Zionists, and with the help of the Americans, who, I mean, it's not the Israelis, the Americans don't control, the Americans control.
So no, I appreciate your question. I mean, I think for Gaza, for example, I don't know if you know this, but the reason that Israel is besieging Gaza, there's two reasons. One is to keep people in a warehouse so that they are out of mind, out of body, out of whatever. And 2/3 of the people of Gaza are refugees. They could look across the border and see their land, So yes, that's a big reason. But the other reason is economical. I mean, Gaza has one of the largest gas fields off the shore of Gaza. $1 trillion worth, by the way. And Israel wants that. That's why Gaza people cannot go 10 miles into the sea. And when they did that, they shoot at them and they injure them and they kill them. This is the real reason. So economy is a very, very important factor. I cannot cover everything in my talk. Economy, politics, human rights, biodiversity, everything I cannot do. So obviously the economic issues are important. And in my slides, actually, I do have something about the economy of the Middle East and why it's critical. But to me, to address the economic issues also requires diversity of opinions and diversity of people working together in a democratic framework. And the Middle East, like many countries in the world, including here in America, by the way, has moved away from democracy. Moved towards autocracy, towards money makes power, not towards democracy. And it's getting worse and worse, by the way. Saudi Arabia, for example, which is bombing Yemen now, which I said I won't talk about it unless somebody asks. But this is the reality. It has to do with money. So yes, I have no problem with that. But the question is what to do, what am I to do? What are you to do? How are we going to shape our own behaviors? Not how are we going to blame Trump or Netanyahu or Abu Mazin, which I have a lot of blame for him also. And I was actually arrested not just by the Israelis, I'm sorry to tell you. The Americans, of course, harassed me at every airport. But also the Jordanian security services investigated me once. And also the Palestinian Authority, which is also an autocracy, capitalist structure, and millionaires getting rich getting richer, poor getting poorer. In Israel, the same way. The number of billionaires in Israel is the highest number of billionaires per capita in the world. I don't know if you know that. More than America.
Really?
Let's take from the back one question. Anybody in the back? Yes, the gentleman all the way in the back.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Corey. You mentioned your studies finding evidence of implications of environmental, like loss of biodiversity or some species loss through the studies you're finding, but some frustration with the PA not prosecuting the state of Israel or pressing charges based on those evidence. It's a two-part, like, to what degree is the colonization of Palestine resulting in environmental degradation? So how many species are you thinking have lost since colonialization? And is there hope for accountability in the future through some courts or body of law?
Good question. Let me start by what Israel has done. I mean, environmentally was devastating. The colonialism for us, just like colonialism here, was devastating for the environment. For example, the first two major projects that Israel has done when it was established in 1948, actually one of them was started being planned before 1948, but the first two major projects was draining the wetlands of the Hula area, which 119 species disappeared completely. It was a major area where migrating birds came through. And then the second one was the diversion of the waters from the headwater of the Jordan River from Lake Tiberias all the way to the western areas, to the coastal areas, which was devastating for the Jordan Valley and resulted in desertification of the Jordan Valley, and many species were lost there, including the fishing owl and many other species that were lost. I'll mention a third one that was related to the politics. When Israel destroyed the 520 or 30 Palestinian villages that were there, including all their almond trees, fig trees, olive trees, carob trees, all of these things they just bulldozed. They replaced them with monoculture, which is European pine trees. And European pine trees as a monoculture is horrible for the ecosystem. And it's also like tinderbox. I mean, any match and you get these fires in it. It's also because the pine leaves, when they fall on the ground, they create acidity. They don't allow things to grow. And these are just three quick examples that I could cite. There are many, many others that I could cite what Israel has done to destroy the Palestinian environment, to change the landscape, etc. Now they are doing one major project now. I don't know if you know about it, which is the Red Sea, Dead Sea Canal, to bring water from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point on earth. It's a horrible idea, by the way. Cost $15 billion. Israel will not be left holding the bag on this $15 billion. So they had it built on the Jordanian side of the border so that the government of Jordan will have the debt of $15 billion. And it's a useless project that's such a waste of money and resources, typical for World Bank, IMF kind of projects. But it leaves Jordan. That's why there were demonstrations in Jordan, by the way, because Jordan has now $37 billion in debt. And they have to raise taxes, and the public is rising up against the monarchy in Jordan for this, because of the stupid ideas that are being forced on Jordan by the Zionist movement and by the US, which acts on behalf, as I said, occupied territory in Washington. That's what they do. So they could go on and on. But I also don't want you to think that all the environmental problems we face are related to Israel. No. We Palestinians, have to face the reality that we also have to protect our environment regardless. And I work with children. Why? Because I think they can affect the change in behavior of their parents and their siblings and everybody around them to protect their environment, to recycle, upcycle, reduce use of fossil fuel, start using bicycles, start walking, whatever. I mean, this is all very important. So we have to take responsibility. Again, liberate our minds, not just blame everything on the Israelis. We cannot do that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Mindy Gershon. I work with Adala New York campaign for the boycott of Israel. You're talking about liberating our minds. I mean, we have the same thing here, very similar, people who just don't want to hear, don't want to know. But you talked about it as if it's something very particular to Palestinians.
No, I mean, I'm talking about Palestine because that's where I'm acting. You know, they say think globally and act locally. So I think globally, but I act locally, and the local people I work with is the people of that country. By Palestinians also, I include Palestinian Jews, as you heard. We have Palestinian Jews, the people who live in the country, who are native, who are part, and people who are immigrants even, who came there and settled. I mean, we have no problem with immigrants, by the way. We Palestinians welcome immigrants. We welcomed Armenians, for example, after the Armenian Holocaust and even before, and we gave them a quarter of our capital. That's why Jerusalem has an Armenian quarter. Ethiopians who came, Russian Jews after the Russian pogroms came to Palestine, they become native. So we welcome these immigrants and we work with them. And when I talk about mental liberation, I don't mean just for Palestinian Muslims and Christians. I mean also for Israeli Jews, and also for you guys, and for me, and for everybody. Because for Israeli Jews, actually, they have bigger mental colonization issues. I'll tell you a quick story about this. One time they arrested me, they put me in this ditch underground, and there's no bathrooms, and it's literally just a hole in the ground with about 15 other people. All of them young people. I was older, the old person there. And there are steps that go up, and there's a soldier at the gate of the fence that's around it. And we were talking, and the soldier said, "Stop talking." And I kept talking, we kept talking. And then he cocked his gun, pointed it at us, and said, "I told you, stop talking." So the kids were afraid, they stopped talking. And I thought about it for a few seconds. And then I started singing and dancing. And he said, "I told you, stop talking." I said, "Yeah, but you didn't say stop singing and dancing." He said, "Well, now I'm telling you, don't do anything, go sit in the corner." I said, "Wait a minute, wait. Can I just say something to you personally? I'm not going to say anything to these other guys. And then after I say what I have to say to you, you can do whatever you want." So he said, "What do you want to say?" So I walk up the steps a little bit. I didn't walk up all eye to eye. I didn't want him to feel threatened. And I said to him, "You know, I'm a professor at the university. I'm not going to go in the bathroom in front of all these kids and this one girl also who was with us. But that's not really why I want to tell you. I want to tell you something more important." He said, "What?" I said, "You know, I'm more free than you are." He said, "What?" I said, "I'm more free than you are. I came here by my choice. It was not the first time I come here. I've come here before. And I know the drill that you will keep us here for 3-4 hours before the interrogations, etc. But you are not free. You cannot do what you want." He said, "No, I'm free. I can do it." I said, "Well, great. Let's you and you shed this uniform and we'll go across the street. There's a nice cafe. We'll sit down and we'll chat." He was like looking puzzled, didn't know how to answer. And this started a conversation with him that lasted about an hour and 15 minutes. So we talked about religion, about Zionism, about the need for a Jewish state, about all these things. And in the end, the same soldier went to his commander and demanded that they let us go to the bathroom. And the only bathroom they had were the soldiers' bathroom. And there were some soldiers who were really shocked that the commander allowed us to go to the bathroom for the first time in that area. And then when we came back, I continued to talk to him, and I was surprised. He was started being open-minded. He was about to shoot us, literally. And I told him about mental colonization and all this issue, and the issue of fear, and how their government uses fear to shackle their minds and all this stuff. And he was just like shocked that there are people who talk to him like this, And I think he started to have mental liberation, if you want. And at the end, he even said to me, "Well, I have to work, if you find me another job, I'll leave." I said, "Well, you're smart, your English was perfect, you can find a job, translator or something." All right, lady here.
Even though East Jerusalem is Palestinian territory, you are not allowed to go into East Jerusalem. That's a question. And the other is, an Israeli woman made this point, that yes, there should be one state at this point. However, that should be only after there are first two states. There should be a Palestinian state. Okay. And it is,
all right. With regards to the first question she asked about East Jerusalem being Palestinian, I'm not allowed into a Palestinian area. That seems strange. Actually, the whole Palestine is Palestinian. I'm sorry. My grandmother comes from Nazareth. I'm not allowed into Nazareth. She's a refugee from Nazareth. East Jerusalem, I used to be a high school teacher in East Jerusalem. My grandfather was a school teacher in Jaffa at one point. So it is not, the whole country is Palestinian. The whole country is off limits to us, except the ghettos that they put us in. The people, warehouses they put us in. So the Gaza people cannot come to the West Bank. The West Bank people cannot go to Gaza, etc. And again, that's understandable in the context of colonization, what they want to do, and which is to deny us our life and livelihood and make life so miserable for us that we decide to leave. And that's understandable. Okay, now with regards, sorry?
But legally, East Jerusalem is Palestine.
Legally by whom?
Well, international law.
No, international law, Israel violates just about every provision of international law that you can think of. There's something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, by the way, that the U.S. has signed. And also Israel, the U.S. Congress said any country that persistently violates human rights, we cannot support them. And the U.S. gives Israel $3.8 billion in direct tax aid from our taxes, your and mine. And they also give them another like $5 billion indirectly because of tax-deductible contributions by Zionist corporations and others who donate to Israel tax-deductible. Even the Israeli army, by the way, is tax-deductible. You can donate tax-deductible to the Israeli army. Imagine that. No other country has that privilege in the U.S. system. But anyway, to go back to the issue of so the human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if you read it, Israel violates just about every aspect of it, which means they also violate U.S. law, because U.S. law says any country that doesn't respect this, we cannot support them, but they do support them. So actually, if any of you as lawyers and want to pursue this, I'm willing to even pay from my own money to sue the U.S. government for the violating of its own laws, its own laws. Okay, now with regards to the other question about the two-state solution being an interim step towards a one-state solution, all I can tell you, and this I wrote in my book in detail, if you're interested, called Sharing the Land of Canaan, which you don't even have to buy. It's available on my website. I'm not a copyright fan, so it doesn't matter. You can look at it on my website called Sharing the Land of Canaan. In that book, I explain why this is such nonsense. And in fact, what happened after 1991, the end of the uprising, 88, 87 actually, to 91, we were this close to liberation. And the talk of the two-state is precisely what Ben-Gurion predicted would do, which is prolong it. So here we are, after the Oslo Accords, even we don't take 1991, take 1993 when they signed the first agreement between the PLO and Israel, which is an agreement that's nonsense. Was implementing the Alon plan and implementing Israeli plans from 50 years before, which is to give autonomy to the people so that they can get off our back. We don't have to take care of them. We collect their taxes, we use their money, but we take all their natural resources, etc. But the point is, it's been 25 years, from 1993 to 2018 we are in. 25 years, a quarter of a century. Delay, not encouragement, not enhancement, delayed the potentiality of resolving the conflict because it made it impossible to resolve the conflict now. It made it very difficult to resolve the conflict because Israel was strengthened beyond any measure. It's strengthened to a point where they can tell the U.S. anything and the U.S. will do it, even against U.S. interests. Now they want the U.S. to attack Iran. By the way, if the U.S. attacks Iran, it's catastrophic for the U.S. The war in Iraq, which was for Israel, by the way, Israel pushed for the war in Iraq, cost U.S. taxpayers $3 trillion with T. Five now.
Lives.
But anyway, I mean, there's a Harvard economist who wrote a book about it. It's called The $3 Trillion War. It's an amazing thing, and for us to do that, supposedly to help our ally and our special friend Israel, is, to me, it boggles the mind that there is no rational people in Washington who see what this is doing to the U.S. economy and to the U.S. potential to continue.
It's capitalism, brother. Capitalism.
Yes.
As I'm sure you are aware, these days the Palestinians are getting less and less support, even from the Sunni Arab countries in the Middle East, who now seem to be more cooperative, more willing to cooperate with Israel because of their mutual hatred of Iran. And I'm just wondering, how do the Palestinians, what hope can they have of asserting themselves and their need for self-determination on the world stage when their own pardon the expression, brethren don't seem to support them.
Okay, with regards to the Arab countries, I beg to differ with you. The Arab leadership, including the Saud royal family, who was put in charge of Saudi Arabia, put in charge of Hijaz, what was called Hijaz at the time, and they changed its names to Saudi Arabia for the Saud royal family. The reason the British put them in power is precisely because they agreed in writing to support Zionism from the beginning, from 1917, not from 1948 or 49. The Arab leadership has always been in collusion with the Zionist forces. Read Avi Shleim's books, for example. Avi Shleim has a book called Collusion Across the Jordan, about the Hashemites in Jordan, their collusion with the Zionist movement. Every single Arab leader was appointed in charge of their position before 1948 by either the British or the French, or sometimes an agreement between the British and the French, to support the Zionist project. This is fact. And I know some countries are going to ban me from entering them now. But this is reality. The people of the Arab world is another story. People of the Arab world have always supported Palestine. And I venture to say their support today is actually stronger than it was ever before. Especially when we talk about the nearby countries, which are Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia even. I know this because I traveled in those countries. I know in Lebanon, the amount of support for Palestinians is unbelievable. I could go to Lebanon and live freely wherever I go. I just say I'm Palestinian, they give me free food, free lodging, whatever. There's strong support. The governments is another story, and unfortunately the governments are, as I said, collusion. And what we have to do is expose these governments and work against them and work to change these circumstances. And some people try to do that. And then there's counter-revolutions that are orchestrated by the CIA. For example, Mossadegh regime, when he was the government elected democratically in Iran, was very supportive of the Palestinians and wanted to nationalize its oil. And immediately the CIA and the M16, whatever they call it, M6, the British, they just toppled them and put the Shah in power, and the Shah became the closest friend of Israel, pissing off his people and torturing them with the Sabak and all of this. And eventually they rose up, and the leftists and also the Islamic forces, and they succeeded in removing him, and then the Ayatollahs took over. And the rest is history. As I say, Iran is very strong now. And the only other thing I would say about this is every action has a reaction. And do not underestimate the power of people to change. And the US and Israel, having used the only tool that's available to them, which is the blunt tool of war, that's what they use. The blunt tool of war is now becoming old history. It does not influence policy. It does not change things. And in fact, it's counterproductive. I told you that we went to Iraq to serve Israel. And I'm convinced of this. And there's a book by Mearsheimer and Walt that talk about this, about how the Israel lobby pushed for the war in Iraq and all of this. But what happened in Iraq? It turned out to be negative for Israel even, and for the US. Because they set in motion movements that they couldn't control. And eventually now Iran has influence in Iraq, and in Syria, and in Lebanon. Hezbollah, when Israel attacked Lebanon in 2006, again, every action there's a reaction. And the reaction was not to weaken Hezbollah, it was to strengthen Hezbollah. Hezbollah became very popular in Lebanon. The last elections show it. So the US and Israel are really at a loss what to do with this. Because every time they push, they get pushed back. And the pushback sometimes is winning. In the case of Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Iran, it is winning. I assure you. In Yemen also it will win. Yemen, you cannot believe this country that's impoverished, that's subjected to a siege around it, that's now even lobbing missiles at the Riyadh airport in Saudi Arabia, which is shelling the middle of the Yemeni cities, you know. So technology changes, wars do not achieve their goals, and they will not achieve their goals, not in Syria, not in Lebanon, not in Iraq, not in Iran, not in Yemen, and certainly not in Gaza and the West Bank. I am convinced of this. Gaza is actually an inspiring model to look at, how 2 million people besieged, starved to death. They are really coming up with ingenious ways to resist. Ingenious. I mean, it's amazing. And the world has to pay attention. And if they don't pay attention, it is not that Israel will win. As I said, I think Zionism has lost. The Israelis need to realize that they have lost. So let's take 2 more questions, and then I'll answer all 3 at the same time.
Very short, sir.
And you asked one before, didn't you?
No.
Not in this lifetime. Hi, my name is Jordan, and the issue is Scandinavia. Many people say, oh, Scandinavia is really working. Their tax rate and their equality, and part of the reason given is the homogeneity of the population in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland, which would seem to go against diversity.
And others? Back there, Rich?
Yeah, Rich Siegel. When you were talking about, when you were comparing different colonialisms, it occurred to me, one detail you didn't mention is that this particular colonialism is extremely passionate because it's a colonialism based on entitlement. You have religious Jews that feel a religious entitlement, and you have secular Jews who feel an entitlement based on history and based on victimization. What, if any, additional challenges does that pose to getting rid of this colonialism?
Okay, maybe I'll take one more question. The gentleman there, and that's it.
Yeah, my name is Mike Catali. One thing you taught me tonight is how even a Museum of Natural History can be a form of resistance. Can be a form of resistance. One thing I disagree with is calling U.S. government Israeli-occupied territory. It reminds me of what Patrick Buchanan, the right-wing candidate, called Congress Israeli-occupied territory. I think it points the wrong direction in terms of, it feeds the idea that somehow there's a Jewish lobby, a Jewish conspiracy that controls the U.S. policy, rather than U.S. policy being based on trying to dominate other parts of the world and not helping this, being controlled by this lobby.
Maybe that's enough because we really have to wrap up. I will start with answering you about this. The Israel lobby in Washington is very strong and has worked even against U.S. imperial interests sometimes. I'll give you an example of this. When George Bush waged the war in Iraq the first time, 1991, and as a part of his rearranging the Middle East, so to speak, he promised the Arab governments that he would pressure Israel on the settlements. And he tried to, and all the oil industry people, all the CEOs were for some sort of settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on international law, and Jim Baker was the Secretary of State. And they tried to link, for very briefly, they tried to link how much Israel spent on settlements with the amount of US aid. And immediately the lobby mobilized. And President Bush, I remember this because I was in the US at the time, President Bush backed down within 2 weeks after the lobby was mobilized in Congress. And when he had a press conference, I remember this vividly, and you can probably dig up this press conference. Bush was standing there, the media was all over him about these questions. And they asked him, why did you drop this idea, etc. He said, well, I'm just this little lonely guy in the White House. And there are these thousands of lobbyists on Congress. This is a fact. This is history that you have to recognize that the Israel lobby sometimes wins even against US military industrial interests.
Yeah.
And I can show you this by numerous examples. If you want, email me. My card is here. I'll be happy to send you the article I wrote about the subject. It doesn't mean that there is a Jewish conspiracy, they're almighty or whatever. None of this is what I said. But it is a strong lobby, sort of like the gun lobby is very strong. It is strong. You cannot deny it. It is there and it is strong, and it shapes US foreign policy with regards at least to the Middle East and sometimes regarding other countries. I mean, when Nikki Haley threatens countries like south of the border, if they don't vote with us on Israel, we're going to cut off aid to them. Why is she doing that? For US interests? I mean, we have to understand there is something there. Now, your question is the most interesting, in my opinion, is why do I think people do have the power to change circumstances that surround them? If you look at history of the United States, read Howard Zinn's book, The People's History of the United States. What are the positive things that happened in the US and how did they happen? How did we end the war in Vietnam? How did we get women's right to vote? How did we get Social Security? How did we get civil rights? How did we get 40-hour work week? They all happened when people worked together. The same in Palestine, by the way. When people work together, I mean, the book that I have in the back called Popular Resistance in Palestine, its subtitle is A History of Hope and Empowerment, not a history of failure. We have been very successful. And read my book if you want to know examples. I don't have time to go through it. But I wouldn't be here speaking to you if my parents and grandparents didn't resist. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't even be born. I may be in a Syrian refugee camp being shelled by ISIS, or something like that. So the resistance was very, very important. And it is successful. And the world, yes, the world will continue to have greedy people, rich people, powerful people, capitalists, as this lady said, people who are exploiting other people. That's always the case. Even when Jesus was there, when I mentioned, and he was a martyr, he was fighting against occupation. So you can say, well, nothing has changed. No, things have changed. Slavery has ended, except in minor few places. The world does evolve, and we humans have to evolve. And the internet and the connectivity allows us to do a lot more than what was available to people at the time of the slavery or the civil rights movement and so forth. We can affect change in behavior. But the other thing I would say is, what's other choice we have? Give up? Commit suicide?
Fight back.
We have to fight back. There's no question about it. There's that old story about a Native American, by the way, a chief who was with his men hanging, being tortured to death with fire. They used to hang them and keep them alive for as long as they can, torturing them. And they asked him, why don't you convert to Jesus, believe in Jesus so that you can go to heaven and not hell? And he said, what is this heaven and hell? Well, heaven is where me and this commander go and because we believe in Jesus, and hell is where you and your people, because you don't believe in Jesus. He said, well, send me to hell, and when you were a slave, would you have preferred to be a house slave or a field slave? To me, I would prefer to be a field slave under the whip, even though I wouldn't see it in my lifetime. But it's that mental freedom that's much more valuable than the physical freedom. And I think that addresses also the other 2 points with what you said there is about this. I mean, okay, there's more difficulties than in South Africa. South Africa didn't have a pro-apartheid lobby in Washington. We have more challenges, but more challenges means more chance for evolution, for opportunity, for development. What else can we do,
Fight back.
There is in the now declassified documents of the negotiations that led to the Balfour and the Drew-Cambon declarations, Balfour Declaration from the British government and the Drew-Cambon Declaration from the French government in support of Zionism. And in the negotiations about that, the main discussion was to get the Zionists in America, including people like Brandeis, to help bring the United States into the First World War. So that was a good portion of the factor that brought these public declarations, the Drew-Cambon Declaration and the Balfour Declaration in support of Zionism.
Why did they want that?
As a quid pro quo, as I said, because the Zionists wanted Palestine. Palestine was under the Ottoman Empire. Who was fighting the Ottoman Empire in the First World War? It was the British and the French. So supporting the British and the French, the Zionists had failed with the Ottoman Empire because of Palestinian resistance, so they turned to the British and the French. They moved the headquarters of the Zionist movement from Vienna to London in 1904 to work on the British government. And it took them 13 years to get the Balfour Declaration.